Today I'm joined by Sam Bompas, director at Bompas Parr, a studio that has reshaped how brands think about experience, the senses, and what it really means to create something memorable. From architectural scale jelly moulds to edible landscapes and immersive multisensory worlds, Bompas Parr operate where food, culture, science, and play collide. Much of their work is deliberately temporary, designed not to be owned, but to be felt, remembered, and talked about long after it's gone. In this conversation, we explore why brands still default to the visual, how impermanence can increase value, and what luxury looks like when the outcome isn't a product, but a feeling. We'll talk about play, provocation, and what the future of experience design demands from brands willing to take risks. Sam, welcome to What the Lux.
Thank you. It's such a joy to be here.
You and Harry, Sam, met when you were young and you went on to build Bompas Parr. And it's quite it's a fairly unique business. What led you to start the studio? Just talk us through the early days.
So we didn't have an intention to start a creative studio. We just wanted to make real things on the weekend. And that's primarily food. The good news about food. So a lot of this is saying with hindsight, but the good news about food is if you focus on one thing, you do it again and again, you can become quite an expert at that really, really quickly. And I don't know if you've got a favorite dish or something that if you're inviting people around that you make for them for a dinner party, or you're more of an experimental cook.
I was very experimental for a period of time, and now I've started becoming lazier and defaulting to certain dishes.
What's your go-to that knocks people's socks off?
I mean, it's winter right now, and so there's this sort of porcini mushroom beef roast. It's like really sort of just wholesome and nice, and it's just delicious. It's a fillet of beef and a sort of porcini and red wine juice. You know, it's just delicious.
I'm hypnotized by it. It sounds absolutely banging.
Yeah.
I love that if you cook that dish again and again and again and again, you could readily become the world's expert in it. And very early on, we lit upon wobbly jelly as something that we're going to obsess over. We're going to make loads of. We're going to have a fine jelly business. And my business partner, Harry, was training to be an architect at the time. He's now a qualified architect. I was working in property marketing, and food and jellying was our great passion. And we very quickly, after starting Bompas Parr, found ourselves being flown across to America to make jellies in America. And you're thinking, this is a continent with hundreds of millions of people. Surely someone knows how to make jelly. And we realized that very quickly we'd achieved a strange and wonderful expertise through our personal interests and obsession. And I still can't see jelly on a menu without wanting to eat it, because if I taste someone's jelly, you know all sorts of things about the palate of the person that's making it, how they perceive flavor, how they balance flavor, what you know. And for example, for me, I'm very sensitive to citrus and relatively sensitive to bitterness, and that impacts how I'll balance out any dish in terms of the flavors that you have within it. So it's just like an insight, a sort of weird key into portal into people's
it was really
perception.
Founded on a shared love of jelly.
Yeah, and shared love of just doing things that are where you make something and you create something rather than have life happen to you. You know, very, very quickly we went from making jellies, and the jellies that we're making, we couldn't afford the sort of copper molds that we really wanted. So Harry worked out that he could make his own using sort of his architectural training, CAD design, rapid prototyping, which was then, this is almost 19 years ago now, at a very, very early stage. So we then very quickly went from that to hosting quite spectacular events. And the first event we hosted was for London Festival of Architecture. And, you know, somehow managed to persuade architects like Roger Sturt Carver & Partners, Foster's, Grimshaw's, the Engineers Arup, to design jellies. And we're going to have a jelly design competition for LFA, London Festival of Architecture. Persuaded UCL to let us have their quad, and put tickets on sale and sold 2,000 tickets. And at the time we had a budget, I think, of £2,000. And so we had a spend per head of £1 per head. And the problem is, as well, is I was promoting this as being about architectural jelly. Everyone thought that the jellies are going to be absolutely huge. They're going to be the shape of houses. They're going to be able to eat their way through. And of course, the jellies we're making are not much bigger than a typical jelly mold. They're about a litre in size, so about 10 centimetres in each direction. They're very small.
Right.
And that's when we, by sheer dint of necessity, started designing with all the sensors in mind, because we knew that if we didn't...
But just quickly, so were people fairly dejected by the diminutive nature of the jelly?
Well, not as it happened on the event, because
I see.
we saw that the sentiment was running high. People thought there'd been these vast jellies, but what we did was really design for all the sensors. So we worked with various people at UCL. We had this vast jelly table, and the purpose of that was to get the jellies up close to people's eyes. So if you have small things that are very close to your eye, they look rather more impressive. Also, moving things have an impact as well. So we made a waggle engine, which was a truck windscreen wiper engine with a kilo weight on the bottom that furiously swished back and forth with all the jellies wobbling. We worked with an inner ear scientist who was interested in the links between the sort of collagen that you might have in your flesh and gelatin, and we actually recorded the sound of jelly wobbling for the first time. That sounded actually pretty disgusting, but in the very alarming, but became for many years the most watched video on New Scientist. And so that was when we started looking at how we could take good science and then make it perhaps accessible or delightful with food. And I went along to a lecture by Heston Blumenthal and heckled him, got him to come. He was filming Heston's Fantastical Feast at the time. And he came and did a segment, which was, there's nothing to enliven a party like quite a serious TV production with a lot of cameras. Now I guess that'd be more common because everyone's a content creator, but then it was a bit more unusual. Yeah, and it's a delight. It was great. It was totally chaotic.
So you heckled him and it worked?
Yeah, like I'm quite an enthusiastic person, and I really believe that people are always looking for ideas. If you've got ideas and you're willing to be generous with them, you can often shape future realities. There he was. He needed content for a TV show.
Yeah. This initial fascination with jelly, which progressed into an interest in what jelly might sound like when wobbled at high frequency.
That was really trying to look at the total sensory qualities of jelly. There was also sort of jelly wrestling and things like that. I guess the trajectory then, as we went into full catering and then full events and then what would eventually be called experiential.
Yeah.
But it wasn't at the time. It was just things that happened with real bodies in real places. And then we moved into things which now be called immersive. Again, similar sort of thing. It's real people doing things that they might find delightful. The words are new, but the actual practice doesn't change a lot.
Yeah. So to cite some of the sorts of projects you've done, alcoholic architecture, immersive environments where visitors inhale vaporized cocktails, realized in different locations, including in Borough Market. That was about a decade ago. The Department of Taste, it's an interesting one, a research-led initiative positioning taste as a cultural, scientific and design discipline. I'd love to hear more about that. At the Vegetable Orchestra for Burberry, and that's a classic. Multi-sensory performance that turned food into sound and spectacle. I think the senses, we come to that. The Gucci Marmont Jelly, a multi-sensory, an edible interpretation of a luxury code. It's pretty cool. Multi-sensory fireworks experiences, flavor-based public art, large-scale food installations for brands, institutions. Malnutrition labels, a conceptual project using edible inks to visualize nutritional deficiency and create behavioral awareness. And the Guinness Storehouse Taste Experience in Dublin, a flavor-led visitor experience within a major cultural attraction. How do you get from jelly to that?
Well, they're all sort of related in a weird way. I think we're talking about it. Jelly has these problems. It doesn't get that big. Also, one of the challenges with jelly is because you're locking all the flavor in this gel matrix, you have quite slow flavor release because the jelly needs to melt in your mouth to give you all the flavor. And some of the other things that you learn from jelly is like making a jelly is a bit like making a cocktail. If you're good at making jellies, you can be good at making cocktails. It's just combining different flavors in a format. So the sort of constraints with jelly, the frustrations with jelly, and then the things we'd learned from jelly was sort of a weird launch pad into the world of understanding how people engage with the food that's in front of them and the environment that's around them. We've always been looking at this line that's held between food and architecture. So with jelly, we're looking at architectural techniques and deploying them at the scale of the food. And then you talked about alcoholic architecture. There we were taking food and exploding it to the scale of architecture so that flavor becomes a vector that's ultimately habitable. And if we'd this podcasting room, which is very, very nice, we could fill it up so densely with gin and tonic that as we're having this conversation, we wouldn't be able to see each other, but we're becoming slowly intoxicated through our lungs and eyeballs with every breath we took. But actually, because you don't have the chill of ice, it means that all those botanicals that you have within something like gin become even more discernible as they're spatialized into the air. And you're able to use your sort of orthonasal and retronasal, which is a fancy way of saying breathing in and out, and seeing what it feels like. It can be quite different, And then also going beyond that, looking at how the totality of an environment choreographs your perception of taste and will make things taste differently. So there's a scientist who wrote a paper in I think 2004 called John Edwards, and he served up something called chicken a la king in different environments. And chicken a la king, the dish when served in a fine dining restaurant, was perceived as like succulent, moist, delicious, when a student halls of residence was considered bad value for money and dry, claggy, horrid.
I remember going to Don Lenoir's restaurant where you're served in the dark by blind waiters. And, you do come out of it thinking you've had lamb cutlets and you're told that you've had sort of grated carrot. Food is just flavor and texture. It's not just flavor and texture, but people forget and a story.
I was going to say so a lot of context and a lot of expectation.
Exactly, but it's actually you can reshape those things more easily than people realize.
Well, your sense. I think we're going to talk a little about the visual aspects of it, but your sense of flavor, which is taste and smell put together, is very at the mercy of your sense of sight and sound, to the point where you can probably change it by about 20%. And we did a project actually with Johnny Walker Blue Label, so for their sort of absolutely beautiful luxury liquid, where we built a working pipe organ which changed your perception of taste as it's playing. It's in our studio now. It's extraordinary. It's a remarkable instrument. Words got round with all the different organists. So every so often we have organists popping up from the Guildhall, coming to play it. It's sounding.
How big is it?
Oh, it's like a 600 pipe organ. So it's pretty substantive. It's 6 meters tall. So we chopped out a bit of the floor.
How big is your studio? I mean, it's an enormous ceiling.
No, we had to go through a floor to put it in, but it's great because it helps with the circulation and the light, and it is too big for the studio because it sounds enormous, but it is very good for a party as well. Right. But with that, the organ as it's played through a commission that we created directs your palate around a glass of whiskey, and so whiskey will have around 600 different discernible flavors, and you can through sight and sound. You can dial them up and dial them down. Now, we did that with an awful lot of science, a huge budget, a lot of build, a lot of design work, and then toured it around to many, 14 different countries. But also you will have experienced that at home or at a wine tasting. If you go to a wine tasting and someone tells you what to find, you'll start noticing those flavors more, which I think is one of the interesting things, to share and cross-reference it.
I'm always interested in how you can be navigated through your own senses.
Well, also someone like yourself with like a huge vocabulary as well and able to like tell stories will be able to take people on incredible journeys. And the thing that I love is there's really like no wrong answer when it comes to taste and smell because everyone's is so very, very different. And you see this with sight, right?
Yeah.
So within our society, sight is so important that if people are short-sighted or long-sighted, we help correct that and sort of normalize, standardize their sight. We don't do the same thing with taste and smell because they won't have as much of an impact.
Material cultures, Western cultures have always famously had bigger vocabularies for what we can see and actually totally neglected felt experience, frankly. That which Arabic, I mean, there are many words in Aboriginal for scent, and there are very few in English that aren't analogous. So it's just, that says it all, really, doesn't it? The etymology,
And a lot of Asian languages will have many, many more words for texture relating to food. So Japanese has around 4. So European languages tend to have.
Is that no?
Umami is like a taste,
Yeah.
but again, like it just shows, I guess how limited.
Is that what you meant? So can you bring that to life? I'm interested.
Yeah. So European languages will typically have about 80 different words associated with texture in food.
80?
80.
Really?
So Japanese will have 400 words associated with texture in food, which means that it's something that's paid more attention to in preparation, because in consumption, you are better able to apprehend the variety and the spectacle and the wonder of it. And also that can lead to some quite unusual, for a Western palate, experiences, which there may be like a level of rejection. If it's too slimy, we find slime's a bit weird. I still find custards quite weird, actually.
Who do you think is innovating in the culinary space in a way that inspires you?
So in the culinary realms, the thing that I love is the total democratization of it. I go online and people in their home kitchens who are inventive, who are imaginative, are making beautiful dancing snakes that they're piping out of sausages. It's delightful, it's silly, it's funny. I think that I remember many years ago we created a 200 course banquet, actually tasting menu. So that was a course dropping every 7 minutes and 14 seconds. 4 diners ate their way all the way through it over 24 hours.
Over 24 hours?
So so for 24 hours, every 7 minutes and 14 seconds, you're getting another plate of food in front of you. It was ludicrous in many ways. It was absurd. It was disgusting, a bit like Le Grand Boeuf. But intellectually, it was quite exciting as well, because if you think of a 3-course meal as a chord, suddenly you're able to have these like rhythms run through it that you can expand up to sort of food on an operatic scale.
To go back to the taxonomy of how you organize these things, what was the journey was it a journey of geography? Was it a journey through this palette? Was it a journey?
We actually sort of pegged things to the time of day and meals that you might have, including more obscure meals like Levins's, and then worked with 10 chefs who each did 20 courses exploring that time of day. And so you're able to sort of have some sort of navigation and wayfinding through it. Now, it's a really long way of saying multi-course tasting menus are a total abomination. That really got it out of the system for me. Now, if I'm invited to anything more than sort of like 3 courses with a little amuse or intercourse, I'm like, this is a lot. And I think having that informality in dining can be is wonderful. The culinary landscape of London is just miraculous. It's incredible. There's not a day goes by when you can't have something completely remarkable. I was just at a tush over the weekend, and for £15 had the most springy, unctuous, slimy, gorgeous noodles.
Your early days were sort of feel, when you talk about them, like a series of experiments and just indulgences of passion. What was the commercial angle, and how did it develop as your studio grew?
So I think the commerce is always really crucial with us, but we don't shy away from being commercial creatives. And very often we're working with the world's biggest brands or governments or places or intellectual properties as well, who, ultimately are only commissioning us if we're going to help them make more money. And I think one of my favorite bits of graffiti that I saw was in the Royal Academy, and it's in the gents' loos, and it's in a cubicle, and it says £3.50 for a tea. Do you not support creatives? Do you not support artists? And someone had written underneath it, "Are you not very good at ideas?" And and I really think good ideas can and should make a lot of money. And we talked about alcoholic architecture. Now that's a bar model, and we financed it at Bompas Parr, and 70,000 people bought a ticket for £12. Now, in terms of a bar revenue model, most of the time when you book to a bar, you don't pay them any money. So suddenly you've got this whole additional revenue stream that's coming in, and a bar that only has a 50-person capacity is able to turn over 500 visitors who've all paid to enter the bar, which is crazy. It's like really, really good business. And I think that's off the back of having something that's interesting, it's differentiated, it's remarkable, it works well in terms of people's storytelling. And those are the sorts of ideas that we're interested in coming up with for ourselves and for clients.
What would like a government hire you for?
Well, when we look at other countries around the world, one of the things I'm always interested in is food. Food's a really good way of expressing identity, and we're curious about other places' food. It's often, I think for Britain, you wouldn't have thought it. One of the top 3 reasons people come to Britain now is for the food.
That's changed a lot in the last couple of decades.
I mean, it used to be a punchline, right?
It was a punchline, exactly.
And so that's incredible. I feel and the reason for that is because of Britain's connection to lots of other places. It's not because people want British food. It's because people are interested in the very many cuisines that you can experience in Britain, which I think is really exciting. But for governments, we might look at how food can be used as an important part of like soft power strategy and how to reach across the table. And a lot of this came from writing a book called Diplomatic Dining, where we went around to all the different embassies in London, interviewed the ambassador about how they used food as part of their mission, or a high commissioner, and then interviewed the chef. The chef often wasn't necessarily from the country of the embassy that they were working in, but then was cooking a nationalistic cuisine. And actually happily then had a feast, which was great. But then you start getting to understand how compelling food is in terms of creating connection between people, of course.
What was it like writing this book?
Sadly, I wasn't writing it, I was commissioning it, but I got to enjoy vicariously the writers dining and banqueting with many of the ambassadors and hearing their stories together. And I think we've done quite a lot of work, for example, with the British government, with Number 10, looking at how we present Britain internationally. Like one of my favorite projects with that was something called the AI Banquet. So far as I know, it's the first food and AI related project. And it was in 2022. So it's before LLMs became widely available. So we had to, and for it, we created basic models for famous Britons. So Ada Lovelace, Mary Seacole, Charles Darwin, William Shakespeare. And you got to have dinner with actors who had an inner earbud feeding them lines from an LLM related to their body of work. And it was completely remarkable. It was really, really great. So you're able to experience vicariously some of these great thinkers from British history using contemporary technology, where they were able to be sort of active participants at the table. And it's interesting from the perspective of innovation in not only the technology, but in the typology of a piece of theatre as well, because it's a piece of theatre in which food gives you, when you sit down at table, you know what the score is. There's a huge process of acculturation to be able to understand what to do.
I always think it's just so missing a sense of what places smelt and sounded like as well, like in like different eras. The sound, the
what era
sounds.
do you like to go back to experience the smell and sound of?
Well, you can just imagine sort of medieval history being quite pungent, but it would be interesting to know what it all smelt like, sort of Victorian England.
Well,
Or,
pungent and
but
delightful as well. It's not necessarily all bad.
well, exactly. What does it smell like? And but also, presumably the sounds are all quite different as well, and that's sort of quite overlooked, I feel. What are the other books you've authored?
So that one I commissioned, like things I really enjoyed authoring. So done lots of books on jelly, done books on feasting, done books on 2 books on cocktails. Been absolutely smashing. One of the books I've really enjoyed doing was about vomit and looking at some of the other aspects of food in the body and the humanity that we find through all having a body, and like how do you draw commonalities between people. So this is called Sloot's Puke, and it was really driven by the uptick in spew and mucus on the streets of London, as the economy recovered post-COVID and people going out, they're eating too much, they're drinking too much, and then they're vomiting. And rather than seeing it as disgusting, it's just seeing it as sort of like a portal of possibility and economic recovery. And so did actually 2 sort of booklets on that. The first was looking at the total history of vomit in London, and then did an exhibition about that. And then we asked people to record their own vomit stories. And they were so horrid and completely disgusting, but also really heartfelt and personal and funny, that we then published a second booklet, Sloot's Puke 2, Regurgitated Tales, which presented some of these little anecdotes in the visitor book.
Good name for it. Regurgitated Tales.
And it was just absolutely bloody delightful. It was really cool.
What was moving about it? What stories do people bring along with the imagery?
Well, I mean, just a lot about terrible starts to relationships, involving gagging and being sick on each other. Terrible ends to relationships, involving much of the same thing. Yeah. Embarrassing moments. I mean, like, we're all, we try not to think about it, but we're all held hostage to our bodies in sort of uncomfortable ways, and
we're physically purging a sort of spiritual. It's like a sort of bit of a cleansing, isn't it?
Well, but I think we try and deny the body all the time, and some of the exciting things that are happening now in culture in some parts of the West, like in Britain or America, is like the rediscovery that maybe we have bodies, and it's interesting to do things like bathe together or sweat together. There's a lot of hocus pocus around it. There's a lot of rather hopeful venture capital. But I think some of the fundamentals are fantastic.
Well, as part of this podcast, we like to challenge what luxury is.
Yep.
And what does it mean to you?
So, I mean, for me, luxury is more about personal agency and not having, and I'd say a really short answer is a luxury is saying no to people's weddings. Nothing gives me more pleasure than being invited to someone's wedding and really having a good think. And I will go to weddings if I really, really like the person. If I think their union is going to be fantastic, then of course I'll go, and it's absolutely delightful, and I revel in it. It's so happy, and I will try and invest totally in making their marriage a terrific success. But I do get invited to an awful lot of weddings, and the second question that comes after someone says, "Oh, could you come to the wedding?" I say yes. It's like, "Oh, could you just help out a little bit?" and so on a weekend where I've said no to a wedding and I'm doing anything else that I want to do on the planet, that is fantastic.
Fair enough.
And I would say that maybe it's slightly facile answered. Like the reality is the thing that I enjoy and value most is that agency. It's the agency to be able to sort of sit together and we incept something, and it's a conversation that we might have over a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, and ostensibly all that's happening is a meeting. But then in 6 months' time, the idea that we've dreamed and scribbled down, it becomes a reality, and that is just the most terrific process. And there's nothing I'd exchange in the world for it.
It's a lovely. That's a lovely thought. What's the
What are we going to do?
yeah, exactly. Well,
What's exciting for you now?
we have to concoct a method for collaboration, an idea to collaborate on.
I mean, there's like one of the best bits of culture I saw last year was the Crystal Pite show at Assembly Hall at Sadler's Wells. And it was a dance meeting in which you had treasurer, secretary, a note taker, chairperson. And there were a group of LARPers who were having a meeting, and it was going to be their last meeting as the hall that they gathered in was being developed. And slowly the meeting dissolved into this fantastical imaginary world that they created between each other. And it just made me weep because of the possibility of creativity through doing kind of boring things. People ask what I do all the time, and like, I do Excel, I make phone calls, I go to meetings, I write decks. It's pretty humdrum, but the thing that sits at the end of it might be that banquet where we're sitting down to feast over steaks cooked with lava, and that is wild and wonderful.
What is it, from your perspective, that makes something stick in someone's mind?
God, that's a good question. I try and think about how you build sort of coat hangers for the brain with concepts, and these are like concepts that are really easy to explain to one another. So, in terms of what I was just talking about, lava banquet, you get it? I get it. Does it look good on camera? Fuck yeah. Is it interesting experientially? Of course. Like, if you got an invite to it, would you want to come? And that's the sort of like way that you sense check. So it's like, do things work really well linguistically so you can tell stories about it in which you are the protagonist? Is there a way that it can be shareable in culture as well through whatever cultural medium, be it this wonderful medium of storytelling and podcast, be it visual. But it's not always about the totally remarkable. I'm sort of interested in if you ask chefs about what their favorite meal is or their best meal, it's not the sort of Michelin stars, not the showy. It's quite often a gathering of people that's significant. It's fun.
Yeah. Are there any brands that you think are doing the senses well?
Yeah, I mean, like there's been a just a maelstrom of brands diving into like what it means to make restaurants, and I think that's really cool. Yeah, if you create with food and drink, inherently you're dealing with all the senses.
Yeah.
And there are so many brands that are so good at it. You only have to think about like hotel groups that are delivering this, across the totality of people's lives. Which has done an amazing bit of work across portfolio for Raffles Fairmont.
Yeah.
Which is like, they've got a huge, beautiful portfolio. How do all of them have very differentiated food products, but all feel coherent and can also change as what we expect to change over time? There's so much expertise in there, and I think setting up those frameworks and tools for them to continue that expertise is rad.
So it can be a tiny, delightful thing that's unnecessary, but it's just such a true expression of brand. And so, I look at things through the lens of customer experience or like the choreography the customer moves through. So you've worked with both cultural institutions and global brands.
Yep.
What's the difference when you start working with very different types of organizations?
I mean, we quite early on were starting to become seen as artists or food artists, whatever that might be, and we had a real think. We actually decided to focus more on commercial brands, and the reason for that was quite often we would be given much more open briefs. The briefs would be make this famous, make lots of money, do something that's never been done before. What an amazing brief.
Yeah. As
opposed to quite often in the cultural sphere, we're being asked to do things that were areas that were perhaps explored already in the past. Okay. So, we found that brands were able to, and particularly speaking about drinks brands as well. So we've done lots and lots of work in the realm of drinks. And it's obviously very, very, very competitive market, with a great appetite for something that's new and novel. So I've really, really enjoyed, the sort of like turbocharged creativity that brings. Now, of course, cultural institutions have like just tremendous assets. Like, we're talking about the National Gallery. You can't, like, I do a lot of, in the work that we're doing with property, I do a lot of like trying to find places to put new cultural things in London. Can you imagine being given a site of that scale on that location in central London with that caliber of build? It's extraordinary. But of course, with these cultural institutions, we think of them as like ossified and ancient. Of course, they're always being remade remade in really exciting ways. They're not that old. You think about the British Museum, it's not that old as a cultural institution.
Yeah.
Like, I know how a lot of these things, like, the Ashmolean and this and the other, were founded because I'm a nerd, but it sort of doesn't matter.
I know they've got really interesting stories, and they've
been
been reshaped. And we had the Royal Academy on a couple of episodes ago, and it's like, it's just like really interesting story. Do you know what I mean? You just, like you said, you just think they're one thing, and they've always been one thing, and they're just actually just a collection of ideas, and they've been different sort of eras of stewardship that have seen it sort of represent different things and sort of merge together with other things, and it's really interesting.
Well, and when the Royal Academy is like radical and anarchic, and is wild, but we see it because now it is part of the establishment. But it's also recognizing that those cultural institutions that are part of the establishment can be fragile. Don't take them for granted. They've taken so much work to get them to where they are now, and they're such an incredible asset. Amazing that you can walk. Anyone can walk in for free to the National Gallery and see the world's treasures and think about what they might do with it.
It strikes me that when you're designing your work, architecting it, there's this sort of balance between delight, provocation, and like a level of unease, and you have to sort of find what ratio works between those. I mean, maybe that's not the right way of taxonomization being the sort of a general theme of this podcast, but maybe that's not the right way of organizing it. But how do you work out how far you can push it in those directions?
Well, I think when you start looking at what's been successful across social media, I think it does need to be like that combination of like beauty and horror. And it's, are we all now dead inside? So we need to like experience more visceral things. But again, we're working with the body, so we're working with the senses. The senses, if we're talking about something like the sense of smell and taste. This is your like final bastion.
I love that. Sorry, I just love I love the expression "we're working with the body." It's almost like, and then combining that with "we're all dead inside." It's like you're sort of a doctor for dead senses, reshaping how the body feels.
I was having a think about how like different eras dovetail and what comes as a consequence. And I was interested in sort of like the fin de siècle Paris, in the sort of 1880s. And I think there was a rejection of modernity that obviously saw the sort of like explosion of creativity. Ennui then being the sort of prevalent mood of the day. But then you start getting, well, a little bit earlier, like poets like Baudelaire, the Impressionists, who we now think of as total establishment, but they were so radical they weren't allowed to be exhibited when they first started creating their Impressionist work. And my hope is you see what's going on today. Whenever you get an email that has been written by AI, you immediately put it in the bin. Mm-hmm. Whenever you start seeing some bunch of sort of AI content, it's horribly cringe. This is a growing and growing sense of ennui. But what happens as a consequence of that, as a reaction of it, I think that boredom can be a terrific goad to future creativity. Many years ago, did this like amazing project. There's psychologists have a coded systems of visual cards that they're able to show people, and they're kept deadly secret. And they're coded to provoke various emotions: anger, lust, hate, disgust, horror. And you can't show them to anyone unless they're in experimental conditions because they'd lose their impact. But it was incredible being able to see them. And then we made new images based on what we'd seen. And of course, food plays a really crucial role, like food in the wrong place, food with hair in it. We all know what that feels like to get a hair stuck in our mouth. And the reason we know what it feels like is our palate is an incredibly sensitive tool. If you've got a hair stuck in your mouth and you eat too many hairs, you can get a bezoar forming, like this giant hairball forming in your stomach. It's a really horrific thing if you ever see one. It's a medical monstrosity. You definitely don't want one. Take those hairs out of the food and out of the mouth.
Yeah, it's so funny.
But it means that it's very, very possible to stimulate those same senses of your brain.
Sam, we've run out of time, so which is hardly surprising, frankly. So I'm going to pick one of our 4 generic outro questions. But I'd like to ask you, what would you most like to change about your industry?
Everyone gets paid to do pitches.
Yeah.
That's it. So clients think real hard about your time.
Yeah.
So by the same token, we won't ask people to do work for free for us.
Yeah.
It's people's time.
I agree.
I like really celebrating that.
Sam, it's been a real pleasure. Thanks for your time.
Cool. Thank you. Like, such good questions. It's wild.
It's been really fun.